Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on February 16th, 2024 from karmicevolution.com or any of your favorite podcast stations. Now, before we get into this week's astro news you can use, my usual quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution, and that a new show drops every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern Time on most major podcast platforms. However, if you do listen to this podcast at karmicevolution.com, you will see a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy. And this is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each of us, depending on our individual sun sign, actually needs to be happy. So be sure to grab it when you listen to this podcast, whether you do so live or after the fact, and enjoy some words of astrological wisdom. In addition, if you'd like to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart in order to gain greater consciousness about what is your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, and what might be holding you back from achieving it, I am offering, on a continuing basis, a 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125. So if you feel stuck, frustrated, or otherwise stymied in your relationships, your career, your health, or other areas of concern and want to learn why, this reading is for you. If you'd like to understand how, by letting your unconscious script based on old soul-conditioned habits and behaviors from the past run the show for you, and now you want to become more conscious about how to change this script going forward, then again, this reading is for you. And if you'd like to co-create your own future happiness through astrological insight, then this reading is definitely for you. Now, bear in mind, it's important to look at your birth chart or your natal chart, which sometimes we call a map, as a soul map for your life's journey. And in that sense, this reading is not about what's going to happen. If you've listened to the show for a while and maybe you are new and you haven't, I often look back to see exactly how the astrological energies have actually manifested here, usually first in the collective, and then we can extrapolate that down to whether or not any of our individual charts were touched seriously by certain aspects, and whether or not it impacted our lives in some important way. Some things impact us very greatly, and others, we just ramble along. So we have to look back to see how, based on the patterns set in your soul map, in your natal chart, you've chosen to manifest those patterns, which again are often, as an evolutionary astrologer, I believe, based in past life karma, whether it's from early this lifetime and something that you can be cognitive of, or from past life karma. And I know many of my listeners are extremely intuitive, if not outright psychic. So as are many who are interested in astrology in general. So in order to look back, we need to get a handle on what your natal chart says. And that must be done before we can move ahead to see what the movement of the planets in the sky or the heavens are aspecting in your particular chart, because your chart is made up of all kinds of different aspects. So you might have a sun square Uranus, or you might have a moon opposite Saturn, or Mars conjunct Saturn, or a Venus Mars conjunction, or whatever. All these things are dependent on where the planets were at the exact moment, date, moment, and location of your birth. So I'm assuming most of you know that, but my point again is to say that the Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading, the discounted reading for $125 for 75 minutes, is for those who want to get as much information out of their natal chart as possible before they move ahead to see what the universe is calling them, what direction the universe is calling them in now. Because, for example, if you have a Uranus transit that's aspecting a T-square in your chart, we know that we have to look at what that original T-square's energy means to you. And only then, with your specific story, can we come up with what Uranus is asking you to change. All right, so anyway, like I said, and that involves not only transits but progressions too, which I do in a separate reading. So again, if you would like to understand where you came from soul-wise, where you've been headed thus far in your life, whether you're 18 or 88, and whether you've been waylaid off the path. I mean, most of us are in different stages because it depends on our age. And it depends also on our level of consciousness. We would hope that as we age, we become more conscious. This is part of Saturn's, archetype of wisdom, right? We want to grow in wisdom as we get older, not only about the world around us, but about our role in it. So what I'm trying to say is that conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable when you take advantage of my special discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading, which you can find at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. Again, the reading is 75 minutes and it costs $125. If you have any questions about this reading, feel free to email me at slhorn16, that's 16, @gmail.com. Now, I would also like to tell everyone that I am getting ready to launch my aspects in chart delineation class, which I am holding under the auspices of the Astrological Society of Princeton, where I am a board member, which will begin on March. Hang on a second, because I didn't write this out beforehand, so I'm ad-libbing here. But I figured it's the 10th. It's March 10th. The class will run for 8 weeks. It is the second part of the Aspects in Astrology class, but if you already have some knowledge of the aspects and are looking to really hone it and to practice interpreting them and understanding how to better learn the different potential archetypal range of manifestations with, say, two people who have the same kind of aspect, but they've manifested behaviorally in completely different ways, then this class is for you. So again, it'll start on March 10th, which is a Sunday. That is actually the Pisces new moon. And it will be held on Sundays weekly with some minor adjustments, because I know we have Easter Sunday on the 31st of March. But basically, it'll be from noon to 2 o'clock, 1:30 or 2. It depends. I tend to run long because I like to cover as much as I possibly can. But if anyone is interested, please send me an email, again, at that same address, slhorn16 @gmail.com. Due to a series of circumstances, I have not sent the full description to ASP, so I'm not going to send you there yet to sign up, but the actual signups will go through aspnj.org. But for now, if you're interested, just send me your email and I will forward it to them so that they can send you the full description of the class and the PayPal link to sign up. I believe it's going to cost $225. That's what the last one was, so I'm just a little tardy in getting all my ducks in a row here. But in any case, again, feel free to email me if you have any questions. It's a good way to just continue your either enthusiasm for astrology, or if you have some, basic knowledge of the planets and the signs and the houses, and now you want to see how they fit together in the pattern that is going to become somebody's chart, or is somebody's chart, including your own, then by all means drop me a line. All right, so let's get now to this week's astro news you can use. And I am going to take a step back again, as I periodically do, to give the big picture, because I guess I actually woke up one morning this week and I was like, wait a minute, let's review, let's go back, because like I said, you got to go back to see what happened in order to predict. You can't forecast or predict if you don't know how certain things played out last time. And as my friend Mitchell Lewis, who used to be on the show fairly regularly when I was interviewing other astrologers, who passed away a few months ago, as he used to say, history doesn't always repeat, but it often does rhyme. And I had studied with Michael Luton, the New York astrologer, whose big thing, as he has said, is recurrence, meaning that when patterns or our ingresses of planets into new signs or houses repeat, or aspects between planets repeat in the sky via mimicking what's in your chart, or say a nation's chart, you will experience what's called a recurrence of the energies. So they may not match exactly, because we may be talking about different signs, and that's what I want to just address briefly at the beginning, for the beginning part of this podcast. So let me do this before, as I said, I get into this past week's astro events and how they played out, because we had a lot of going on since the last week's Aquarius new moon that squared Uranus, right? And I'm sure you're familiar with the basics of that, but I'll get into that in a few. And into what's coming up next week. I want to share with you first some of my thoughts on the ingress of Pluto into Aquarius, which, just as a reminder, Pluto first entered Aquarius on March 23rd of 2023. That's almost a year ago, 11 months ago. Then Pluto retrograded back into Capricorn on June 11th, 2023, for the rest of the entire year, which is obviously half the year, until moving into Aquarius again on January 20th of this year, 2024. And that, coincidentally, was the same day that the Sun conjoined Pluto at 2959 Capricorn and then entered Aquarius too. So I did speak about that when it happened. You can look back at a past podcast. We had a lot going on then too. But Pluto right now currently is in forward motion in Aquarius. And he will remain there until he retrogrades once again for the final time back into Capricorn on September 1st, which is coincidentally the same day that the ruler of Aquarius, which is the planet Uranus, which is the sign, right? Uranus rules Aquarius, and Pluto is transiting through Aquarius. So it's called the dispositor. If you have a planet, say you have the Sun in Sun in Taurus, right? The dispositor of Taurus is Venus. So your Sun would be ruled by Venus. In this case, it's a transit. So Pluto is now waxing back and forth between being ruled by Capricorn and by Saturn, which is the ruler of Capricorn, and by Uranus, which I use as the modern ruler of Aquarius. Uranus will be stationing retrograde at 2715 Taurus, also on September 1st of this year. So between September 1st and October 12th, Pluto will have retrograded back into Capricorn, but then again he will re-enter Aquarius come November 19th for the next 20 years, until he first dips his toe into Pisces on March 9th of 2043. So I'd like to revisit now what happened when Pluto first went into Capricorn on January 26th of 2008, retrograded back into Sagittarius on June 14th, then re-entered Capricorn November 27th of 2008 for the duration until he entered Aquarius again on March 23rd of 2023. So November 2008 was when the world found out about the U.S. banking crisis, which led to a global depression. Now, I have long described the archetype of Saturn-ruled Capricorn as one that represents foundational security. This is primarily addressed to Saturn, but Saturn rules Capricorn. So these two, in my mind, become somewhat synonymous, okay? The truth is that security does not come from what we have or what we own, meaning material stuff, but rather from a strong inner sense of security that no matter what happens to us, we will not only be okay, meaning we'll not only survive, but that ultimately we will once again thrive. So should something negative happen and we lose our house, we lose our money, we lose our job, let's say, right? Or we lose a loved one, that we will recover because we have an inner sense or strong inner sense of security. Now, given human nature and the amount of trauma, I think that's existed in the world for millennium, it's difficult to find someone who has that kind of rock solid sense of security, right? So this is something that all of us strive for. It's part of the reason our soul is here, in my opinion. But just to continue, in addition, I describe the Saturn and Capricorn archetypes as the foundation necessary upon which to build a house. So this is a metaphorical depiction of what I'm talking about when I say security, because if we lay down a solid foundation, read our inner resources, become manifested through outer ones, such as the building or purchasing of a home, we can then erect walls. And once the walls are up, we can then add a roof, etc. In the end, a physical house is what allows us to protect ourselves from outside forces, be they the weather or other natural elements such as predatory animals, or worse yet, predatory humans. So it's no coincidence, for example, that many people move out of their parents' homes and find their own place or buy their own home at their first Saturn return, especially in modern times with the pandemic that we've just all survived over the past couple of years, right? And the first Saturn return is between the ages of 29 and 30. Likewise, often at that age, people solidify their careers by either getting promoted, starting their own business, or becoming successful in a business, since, things have changed since I went to college. And I may have said this before, though I don't expect anyone to remember it, that when I was in college, there was no such thing as majoring in entrepreneurism, right? So, and the financial markets have changed so much with the kinds of things that they offer through venture capitalists and things like that, that some of us do have younger children or, other relatives who did go to college to learn how to start a business. But regardless of that, what I'm trying to say is at the Saturn return that we generally establish ourselves as somewhat successful at something. So if it's our career, we feel solid in it. Perhaps we've gotten a promotion, perhaps we changed companies and, gotten a promotion that way, or, obviously promotion with more money, But in any case, the people who have partners but are not married may marry, or partners may move into a house together, or they may buy a house together, married or not, because again, that's another thing that's changed over time. Or, as many do, they may begin a family. Or one of my favorite things, they move in together, whether they buy a house or not, and they get a pet. And then that pet is the precursor to having the baby in a year or 2 or 3. So all of these events represent the movement into adulthood at the Saturn return in astrological terms. But Pluto, the planetary archetype of transformation necessary for our evolution and our survival, while in Capricorn transformed this sense of foundational security on the collective level or societal level, not just in the US, but globally when it went into Capricorn. And I'm going to read to you, this is a pretty concise summation from Wikipedia, and I quote, "The 2007-2008 financial crisis, or global financial crisis," they give it actually an acronym, GFC, "was the most severe worldwide economic crisis since the Great Depression. Predatory lending in the form of subprime mortgages targeting low-income home buyers, excessive risk-taking by global financial institutions, a continuous buildup of toxic assets within banks, and the bursting of the the United States housing bubble culminated in a quote-unquote perfect storm, which led to the Great Recession." Now, I know a lot of you know this, but I just thought what I'm trying to do is remind ourselves so that we can use it, like I said earlier, to when history may not repeat itself exactly, but will rhyme, because the slowest moving planet in the heavens is going to be changing signs this year for the next 20 years. So I go back to Wikipedia and I quote, "Mortgage-backed securities tied to American real estate," remember what I said about Saturn, "as well as a vast web of derivatives linked to those mortgage-backed securities, collapsed in value." Now we know Saturn and Capricorn, they have to do with business, right? They have to do with banking. They have to do with capitalism in general. So Wikipedia continues, "Financial institutions worldwide suffered severe damage, reaching a climax with the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers on September 15, 2008, and a subsequent international banking crisis. The crisis sparked the Great Recession, which at the time was the most severe global recession since the Great Depression." So we're talking about 1929, 1930, etc., what followed, right? Was it Black Monday or Black Tuesday? I think it was Black Monday, I forgot now. It was also followed by the European debt crisis, Wikipedia continues, which began with a deficit in Greece in late 2009, and the 2008 to 2011 Icelandic financial crisis, which involved the bank failure of all 3 of the major banks in Iceland. And who would have thunk that, right? And relative to the size of its economy, was the largest economic collapse suffered by any country in history. It was, this helps widen out the scope of what we're talking about when Pluto went into Capricorn. It's not just felt in one place or another. Again, it's felt more severely in certain places because I would assume the charts of both of these countries mentioned would be, would show Pluto's ingress into Capricorn pretty prominently as a kind of flashing red sign, right? But we're not going to look at that right now. So I continue to quote from Wikipedia. "It was among the 5 worst financial crises the world had experienced and led to a loss of more than $2 trillion from the global economy. U.S. home mortgage debt relative to the GDP increased from an average of 46% during the 1990s to 73% during 2008, reaching $10.5 trillion. The increase in cash-out refinancings as home values rose fueled an increase in consumption that could no longer be sustained when home prices declined. Many financial institutions owned investments whose value was based on home mortgages, such as mortgage-backed securities or credit derivatives used to insure them against failure, which declined in value significantly. The International Monetary Fund estimated that large U.S. and European banks lost more than $1 trillion on toxic assets. Note the word toxic in relationship to Pluto, because another thing my friend Mitchell Lewis used to say is that Pluto brings to the surface all of the toxicity that's been lurking underneath. He likened it to a boil, right? So if the pus is underneath and you have a boil, eventually it's going to break through to the surface. You're going to pop it and it will go all over the place. You clean it up and then you start the healing process, all right? So that was the beginning of that. But just to finish out what Wikipedia says, they lost, the U.S. and European banks lost more than $1 trillion on toxic assets and from bad loans from January 2007 to September 2009. And they continue, the lack of investor confidence in bank solvency and declines in credit availability led to plummeting stock and commodity prices in late 2008 when Pluto ingressed into Capricorn for the next 2008 till now, right? But back then in late 2008 and early 2009, the crisis rapidly spread into a global economic shock, resulting in several bank failures. Economies worldwide slowed during this period since credit tightened and international trade declined. Housing markets suffered and unemployment soared, resulting in evictions and foreclosures. I don't know where everybody else listening is from, but I was living in New Jersey, I still am, and the term underwater became pretty much a familiar one to a lot of people, where their mortgages were higher than the value of their homes at this point. And again, Wikipedia, several businesses failed from its peak in the second quarter of 2007 at $61.4 trillion. Household wealth in the United States fell $11 trillion to $50.4 trillion by the end of the first quarter of 2009, resulting in a decline in consumption, then a decline in business investment. In the fourth quarter of 2008, the quarter-over-quarter decline in real GDP in the U.S. was 8.4%. The U.S. unemployment rate peaked at 11% in October 2009, the highest rate since 1983 and roughly twice the pre-crisis rate. The average hours per work week declined to 33, the lowest level since the government began collecting data in 1964. And again, Wikipedia, and forgive me for being so verbose on this, but again, I really found this quite profound when I read it myself as a way of jogging my memory, because some of this stuff I didn't know. I mean, we're all pretty myopic, right? We remember what happened in our local area, but not so much aware or remembering of the stuff that went on around the world. So Wikipedia continues, the economic crisis started in the U.S. but spread to the rest of the world. U.S. consumption accounted for more than a third of the growth in global consumption between 2000 and 2007, and the rest of the world depended on the U.S. consumer as a source of demand. As part of national fiscal policy response to the Great Recession, governments and central banks, including the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of England, provided then unprecedented trillions of dollars in bailouts and stimulus, including expansive fiscal policy and monetary policy, to offset the decline in consumption and lending capacity, avoid a further collapse, encourage lending, restore faith in the integral commercial paper markets, avoid the risk of a deflationary spiral, and provide banks with enough funds to allow customers to make withdrawals, right? That's to avoid a run on the banks, which is what did us in the original Great Depression in 1929. And Wikipedia goes on, in effect, the central banks went from being the lender of last resort to the lender of only resort for a significant portion of the economy. Typical families did not fare well, nor did the wealthy but not wealthiest families just beneath the pyramid's top. However, half of the poorest families in the United States did not have wealth declines at all during the crisis because they generally did not own financial investments whose value can fluctuate. The Federal Reserve surveyed 4,000 households between 2007 and 2009 and found that the total wealth of 63% of all Americans declined in that period, and 77% of the richest families had a decrease in total wealth, while only 50% of those on the bottom of the pyramid suffered a decrease. Now, and that's the end of my quote from Wikipedia, and I'm saying although we have built up wealth again, we know that the financial inequity between people has widened, at least here in the U.S., and much has been written about this. And if we're looking more at the microcosm of housing costs, and things like the New York Times recently printing an article stating that rental prices in New York City are the highest they have been since 1968. Now, why do people rent? Because they can't afford to buy, right? Although in places like New York City or any of the major cities around the country, of course, young people gravitate there to make their fortune. So they're going to rent because they're still starting out and hoping to continue to increase their salaries and to get to the point where they can buy a piece of real estate. But now, however, we have transiting Pluto, rocking and rolling like it did before between Capricorn and Sagittarius during some of this time period I just outlined, from 2007 to till late 2009. Pluto is rocking and rolling between Capricorn and the forward movement into Aquarius, as I said already, from starting in March 23rd, 2023 until November 19th of this year, 2024. And it's well known amongst astrologers that you get the biggest bang within the collective when a planet, particularly a slow-moving one like Pluto, enters a new sign. So the question is, if the last time Pluto went into a new sign, and it happened to be Capricorn, and we got the Great Global Depression, what is building up right now as Pluto's going back and forth between these two signs, and what will culminate in a big bang as we begin to enter into the age of Aquarius for the next 2,000 years, with Pluto's ingress into Aquarius for the long term again in November. So the Uranus-ruled Aquarius archetype, through which Pluto is transiting, is about friends and groups. It's a fixed air sign, which, as I've explained in previous podcasts, at its best represents the ability to come up with outside-the-box solutions that benefit humanity over the long term. Like figuring out how to put a man on the moon. I suppose, I wrote that and then I thought, well, has it benefited us? But I think, yes, I'm not a scientist. We've made huge technological advances since doing that, not the least of which is putting up all these satellites and things like that in the sky. However, Aquarius, the archetype at its worst, is groups of people who get stuck in fixed ideologies which never waver. And given that Uranus rules the 11th house of the legislature in mundane astrology, the Aquarian archetype also possesses a connotation with the body, read the group, which makes the laws. So, or I should say the law-making or legislative-making body. So it's not the justice system per se, or the judge, which are part of the judicial system here in the U.S., but rather, and related more to Jupiter and to Saturn, but rather the elected representatives who make laws on behalf of U.S. citizens that Jupiter's 9th house upholds in court, and Saturn's 8th house judges who often yield a final verdict in terms of the decision about what a punishment should be. And since we know, of course, the U.S. natal chart's Pluto return has occurred starting back in 2022, we have already begun to see the cracks of the former foundation of the U.S. legislature and its other two branches by association, meaning the legal justice system and the executive branch, begin to form. We know that the widening of ideological differences between the major U.S. political parties, which I believe actually began in earnest in terms of the Republican Party's transformation here in the U.S., with Jupiter's entrance into Libra on September 9th, 2016, has caused a drastic transformation, what used to be known as the Party of Lincoln, right? And it's clear to me that looking back now, that between then and Jupiter's entrance into Scorpio on October 11th of 2017, Trump had become president. So I'm sure we're all capable of recalling those clips that they show over and over again, even now, where originally senators like Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and so many others called Trump a no-good liar with no political experience who should never, ever, 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 ever be president, yet who now suck up to him like their life depends on it. And politically speaking, it does, right? So as these cracks begin to form, and the ideological differences between the two major U.S. political parties began to widen, we had Donald Trump as our president, and of course we had January 6, 2021, when an insurrection occurs. So, what I'm trying to point out here is that we have to take the big overview when we're looking at Pluto into Aquarius, and since my focus is always the kind of ninth house, which is to say historical and or just bigger picture, right? Looking at the symbolism of what's going on. The cracks have already begun to appear and they're only widening. I believe that, and those of you who are regular listeners, know that I've gone on quite at length several times over the last 2 years, or a little bit less, since we had the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Pisces in I think it was April 12th of 2022, which we're rapidly getting close to being 2 years ago, and that Neptune represents dissolution, and Uranus, we're going to look at it specifically as the ruler of the House of Legislature, or the legislature, is the dissolution of the legislature. And given the state of the legislature here in the United States right now, it doesn't seem like a very strong argument could be made against that kind of analysis, right? So again, right now, present day, it looks like, we've got the situation everybody's aware of. We've got a president who hasn't been tried and or convicted of inciting or planning or whatever an insurrection. But we also, as I've also pointed out previously in podcasts, we have elected officials who participated in obstructing the ability of the vice president at that time to put forward the legitimate electors from the states. And so we have a president and I think it was 147 between 8, I think, in the Senate and the rest in the House, who aided and abetted him in obstructing this justice. So will Pluto in Aquarius widen continuously these cracks based on ideologies that are transforming and have been transforming over the past few years about all kinds of things, not the least of which is fraud, right? Because that's another Jupiter-Uranus kind of thing. It's like, oh, what are the facts? Are they true? The Jupiter's the legal system. Just the facts, ma'am. You can't go to court and make up a bunch of stories like Trump does and expect to win your case. So on that score, let's look at a couple of things that have happened this past week, and then a quick look at what's going on next week. When the Aquarius new moon occurred last Friday on February 9th at 20 degrees 41 minutes of Aquarius, and both luminaries, the sun the day before, the moon just prior to the exact new moon, squared Uranus, which is the ruler of both of the luminaries, we got, and I believe I announced it last week, but there wasn't much information at that point. The special prosecutor, Robert Hur, had released what they're now calling, and have been calling for a week, a gratuitous report that absolves Biden in terms of the classified documents that they found at his home and his old office, but impugning him as old and confused. And so that has sparked a couple different things, not the least of which worries that this will harm Biden, in addition to the current situation between Israel and Hamas in Gaza and his support of Israel there, that these two things together, a report saying over and over and over again that he is an old man with a poor memory, that will lose him some voters who might have been inclined to vote for him previously, as well as a lot of young people, because of course the other thing with, and I've mentioned this before, I believe Uranus and Pluto is revolution. I do believe, and I've said this before, that we're in a repeat or a recurrence of the mid-1960s when Uranus conjoined Pluto, and we had student uprisings. We're seeing this again. I've mentioned it peripherally over the past couple of weeks or month or two with the war in Gaza, and how students who are young are primarily speaking out on behalf of the Palestinians, in favor of their having their own state. And now, of course, with the huge number of atrocities there, deaths, a very high percentage of women and children, that this is just precipitating this big bang with with Pluto moving into Uranus over the long term. I wanted to mention, just an aside too, more on a global level, is that on February 10th, which was the day after the Aquarius new moon, there's a headline in the New York Times that says, "Shocking opposition victory throws Pakistan into chaos. The party of Imran Khan, the jailed former prime minister, took the most seats, surprising the country's military rulers and fueling a political crisis." So if you recall, I did a podcast that included in the last week or two the fact that we are part, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction from January 12th of 2020 is starting to come into fruition, because we had, we're at the nascent stage of a new world order. So, and the fact that so many countries are all going to the polls, or the citizens in so many countries are going to the polls, we of course have to discount those countries where votes don't count, because it's all pretty much a sham. But for those that are democratically led, and I had mentioned Taiwan, which managed to hold on to its democratic government via the vote a few weeks ago, this one in Pakistan is interesting because, and you can Google this, I don't want to belabor the details because I've got other stuff I want to get to, but I wanted to point out that in this article in the Times, it mentioned artificial intelligence, and it mentioned Khan, who is the jailed former prime minister, running some of the campaign by addressing people from the internet from his jail cell. So if we're looking at Aquarius and the transformation of uses of technology, including artificial intelligence, which we all know also has yet to be dealt with on a meaningful level globally. I mean, the EU is the only one, or some of the European states, that have begun to regulate artificial intelligence, but we got a long way to go here. So this is a really important topic that has already been for the, how long, past 2 years at least, front and center, but this past year particularly, right? So, also on February 10th, the Department of Defense's Secretary Lloyd Austin was admitted to the hospital for bladder problems, and he had to cancel his trips to NATO and Brussels. This is just, what I'm looking at here is the movement from Capricorn to Aquarius in terms of Pluto, okay? And that we have if you turn on the news or read anything or go on YouTube, you will see over and over and over again this whole discussion, especially since at the Aquarius new moon, the release of the special prosecutor's report about Biden and the classified docs, labeling him as an old man with a poor memory. And all you see, depending on what channel or which favorite newscaster or what, newspaper you're reading, etc., is the discussion of age. So we've got two old men running, and if you watch Jon Stewart at his new Comedy Central show again, which I did the other day, you can listen to what he has to say about that, because he points out the flaws of both of them, which is interesting. However, this Lloyd Austin DOD secretary's story too is he's the head of the Defense Department in the United States at a time when we have so much ideological opposition to America's role in the world, which is gravitating more with these cracks that have appeared in the legislature towards isolationism rather than remaining or attempting to remain as a major world power. I'm talking about the U.S., that he himself he's sick, right? I mean, he went in for prostate something. I don't remember if he has, forgive me, because I'm not getting real detailed here except with my dates about Pluto and Jupiter and that kind of stuff. I don't remember if he was actually diagnosed with cancer or not. But I know he went for some kind of prostate thing originally. That was when he left the office and didn't tell anyone where he was and yada yada, and they made a big stink about that. Anyway, the point is we're moving out of the era of the old people running things and into one that will eventually turn over into young people running things. That's what happened in the 60s, not that it was without its disruptions, but also a return back to the norm. I always think of the Who's song, Meet the New Boss, same as the old boss, right? But anyway, let me move on to talk about a couple other things, which of course manifested in horrible ways with the culmination of the Mars-Pluto conjunction. Mars moved into Aquarius on February. It moved into Aquarius late on the 12th or early on the 13th, depending on your time zone, and then Mars conjoined with Pluto late on the 13th and early on the 14th. And probably about 12 hours after that meetup between Mars and Pluto in Aquarius, which is a hugely explosive energy, or potentially explosive energy. Of course, we had the Kansas City Chiefs parade in Kansas City, Missouri, and the I really don't know any other way to say it, but the attempted massacre of the people attending that particular event. The news has reported that there were close to 1 million people there. Remember, Aquarius is groups. Pluto is death and destruction. Mars-Pluto conjunction is part of the microcosm. Underneath that huge macrocosmic energy is a sudden unexpected violence, potentially. That's the worst form of manifestation. So I'm not going to give you all the accurate details. One person died. I believe she was with a radio station. I think I saw that she was a DJ at one of the local stations, either in Missouri or Kansas, I'm not sure which, who was at the event, and that there are a number of children who were wounded and in critical condition. That's not something that you don't already know, I'm sure. But I also want to mention Trump's remarks at his recent rally, I think it was in South Carolina, about not supporting NATO if it doesn't pay its dues, right? So that's a whole nother thing about money, because Pluto is always, on or around the Mars-Pluto conjunction. Trump is quoted as saying that if they don't pay their dues, then America doesn't have to protect them, doesn't have to join with them if Russia takes an invasive action, because he would simply let Russia have at it, right? So that means Russia can be as violent as it wants. There are many other things that have happened this week with relation to, the fact that Pluto represents other people's money and joint resources, and that, we already knew, I think, that Trump's not granted likely, well, the Supreme Court has agreed to take up, we had the ruling from the Colorado ballot situation, right? That case that was decided that he couldn't be on the ballot in Colorado, but it's now been appealed by Trump to the Supreme Court, which may or may not take the case, but the stipulation by the appeals court was that he would not be granted a stay. So if the Supreme Court, I think I talked about this last week, so forgive me, but if the Supreme Court doesn't take the case, then there is no stay on Judge Chutkan's case, which is Jack Smith's case in federal court. But on the other thing, yesterday on February 15th, that Judge Juan Merchan dismissed Mr. Trump's long-shot request that he throw out the charges in the hush money case that was brought by New York State AG Alan Bragg, which stemmed from a hush money payment to a porn star, Stormy Daniels, and he set a firm date for the trial, which had been tentatively scheduled for March 25th. So that is the date that the judge has kept to. And this represents the first criminal prosecution of a former American president. The article that appeared in the Times that I took some of this information from said, and I quote, Judge Merchan mentioned talking to the judge in Washington, Tanya Chutkan. There has been precious little coordination on scheduling these cases, at least in the public eye. So the implication is that he discussed with her whether it was okay with her to choose a date to go forward with the New York AG's trial and not wait to see the outcome of Jack Smith's federal criminal trial against Trump. Also, Thursday on February 15th, as we're heading toward today's first quarter lunar square of the Aquarius new moon cycle, the Taurus moon square the Aquarius sun, followed by Venus's entrance into Aquarius, and then later today, that will already have happened when you're listening to this podcast, but later on the 16th, Mercury will square Uranus. Now, Judge Engoron, I still don't know how to pronounce his name, Engoron or Engoron, in the Trump Organization trial, also in New York, which is the civil trial, has said that he will make his decision by the 16th. So by the time you're listening to this podcast, the decision may have already been announced. I would assume with Mercury square Uranus, somebody is going to be surprised and shocked. The question is, will it be those who favor Trump having to pay up to $347 million and not be able to practice business in the state of New York ever again? Or will we be surprised that that doesn't happen? Okay? And the other thing yesterday is that I watched a decent portion of the testimony in the Fani Willis case, which is trying to disqualify her as the attorney general in charge of, she's the district attorney. It says the key issue in today's hearing is, and this was yesterday, is whether Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee will hear enough persuasive evidence to disqualify Fani Willis, the district attorney, and her office. If that happens, the future of the Trump prosecution in Georgia will be uncertain, since the process to find a new prosecutor can be cumbersome. So we are looking at, a couple of different things. Also, whether or not the Supreme Court, which Jack Smith had, submitted something to, they requested something from him after, in terms of their ability to decide whether or not to take the case, which he submitted also the day of the Mars-Pluto conjunction, or just after. I think it was the 14th. But, most are expecting a pretty rapid decision by the Supreme Court. So it's possible that could come on the 16th. I am, of course, recording this late on the 15th, so I do not know. In any case, we are headed into a Venus-Pluto conjunction on February 17th, but that will also be part of the Mars-Pluto. So it's Mars-Venus, it's actually Venus-Pluto-Mars, because Mars is moving ahead, right? And so that stellium in Aquarius is going to have something to do with finances, and it's going to have something to do with people's values. So the other thing that I noticed today, which I thought was pretty remarkable, and give me a second while I look it up, was the announcement that I saw via the Washington Post with a headline that said Truth Social, which of course is Trump's social media platform, merger deal wins key approval of victory for Trump. The former president's stake in the post-merger company would be valued at today's share price at nearly $4 billion. The Securities and Exchange Commission has approved the merger proposal of former President Donald Trump's media startup with a special purpose acquisition company that's called a SPAC, which is a newer instrument, a critical step for a long-delayed deal that would make the owner of Trump's website, Truth Social, a publicly traded company and unlock $300 million in investor funds. Now, it goes into some of the details, but it does have a quote here that says, Jay Ritter, a finance professor at the University of Florida, said the windfall is, quote, paper wealth, with an emphasis on paper, since Trump's media shares cannot be currently sold. And it goes on to say Trump's media's key stockholders, including Trump and its management team, agreed to a common financial provision known as a lockup period that prevents them from selling shares for 6 months after the merger, unless Digital World, which is the one that's making the deal with them, waives the agreement. So if the merger occurs in April, for instance, Trump would not be able to sell his shares until October, at which point their value may have changed considerably. Remember, Uranus is in Taurus. Ritter said that in his opinion, the merged company's valuation, roughly $9 billion, based on Digital World's current price, is out of sync with the Trump company's financial performance. Trump Media generated $3.4 million in revenue and lost $49 million during the first 9 months of 2023. So Trump Media is a, quote, money-losing company that generates less than $5 million per year, Ritter said. Okay, so enough said, because at first this article upset me greatly, thinking that they might charge him $347 million out of the New York case, the Letitia James case, and, and that could bankrupt him, because they were saying he only has about $400 million of liquidity. But here it's clear that even if this deal does go through, he wouldn't have access to the funds. And I don't know, because we'll have to stay tuned to see whether those funds would in some way be remanded to a repayment of a debt based on a legal judgment. Anyway, there is more. The sun is entering Pisces on the 18th. Things will change in tenure a little bit. But we're going to get to that next week, because Mercury will follow on the 22nd and 23rd, and we'll have the Virgo full moon on the 24th, which I'll talk about at length next week. So thank you, everyone, for joining me today. Thank you for being patient, listening to the history lesson, but I hope you learned a lot about how Pluto rolls, and I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me February 23rd for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. to come and free to go.